Yo, what is going on, everyone? My name is Nick, or the Notorious Fantasy, and in today's video, we're going to be going in depth into my 4 wide receivers that I can't stop drafting right now. But before we can get on into things, I would like to ask that if you guys are new to the channel and you do end up enjoying today's video, that you please make sure to hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, whether you are new to the channel or not, please make sure that you do leave a like on today's video. It would help me out a ton, and if you do want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at NotoriousFantasy. So without further ado, let's get on into the 4 wide receivers that I can't stop drafting right now. We begin at number 1 with Devante Adams of the Las Vegas Raiders. Underdog ADP wide receiver 7 at pick 11.1. It is important to note that Underdog very early on in drafts is incredibly wide receiver heavy. So I would say in most redraft leagues, Devante Adams will end up being a early second round pick. Now, there is a lot of negativity that I have been seeing around the name of Devante Adams. Now, Jimmy Garoppolo, the new quarterback for the Raiders, recently got surgery. It wasn't like it was on his arm or his shoulder or anything, but people are starting to panic about Devante Adams. And I get it, right? I'm not a Jimmy Garoppolo stan. I don't love Jimmy Garoppolo, but ultimately, I believe that Devante Adams will be able to put up big numbers regardless of who the quarterback is, because of just the simple fact that he is one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. He was the wide receiver number 3 in half PPR last season and the wide receiver number 4 in half PPR points per game. Remember, there was part of the season where it was Derek Carr, and then it shifted to Jarrett Stidham. Now, Stidham was definitely a little bit more impressive than I thought he would look, but it's not like Jarrett Stidham is even on the same level of Jimmy Garoppolo, and still Devante Adams was able to flourish in this system. And again, I don't even like the Josh McDaniels system that we have with the Las Vegas Raiders, but Devante Adams has been just fine there. 17 games played, 180 targets, 10.6 per game. Number 2, 100 receptions, 5.9 per game. 7th, 1,516 receiving yards, 89.2 per game. 3rd, and 14 total touchdowns. Number 1. Now, you might be worried about the touchdowns going down, because obviously anytime someone scores 13, 14, 15 touchdowns, it's very likely that they are going to regress. But I feel as though that is baked into his ADP, right? He finishes wide receiver 3 in half PPR last year, wide receiver 4 in points per game, and he's coming off the board as wide receiver 7. He is like the ugly duckling of these top tier at the wide receiver position. Everyone loves Cooper Kupp. They love Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase. They love Stephon Diggs. But it seems like Devante Adams is like a fucking castaway from this group. Right? That's what it feels like. Because Devante Adams, despite not having great target accuracy last year, 7 target accuracy, 69th at wide receiver, the guy still had a 43.2% dominator rating. Second, he was that dominant on a team with Josh Jacobs. He was so good last season, and he also had 256 total route wins, 5th at wide receiver. So while he might be getting a little bit older in some people's eyes, he might not be quote-unquote in his prime. He no longer has Aaron Rodgers. The guy is just that good. As long as the ball is in the vicinity of Devante Adams, he is going to bring that thing down. And Devante Adams even said himself that the quarterback does not make him. And I believe in that. Sure, does it help when you have Aaron Rodgers for most of your career? 100% it does. Of course it does when you have a great quarterback. But if you are as skilled as Devante Adams, you can make these not so great quarterbacks, cough cough, Derek Carr, Jarrett Stidham, Jimmy Garoppolo, look better than they actually are. Now, again, am I the highest on this Raiders offense? No. But it's not like they were amazing last year, and Adams and Jacobs were still feasting like Ezekiel Elliott during Thanksgiving dinner. Moving to number 2 here, we got my guy Scary Terry McLaurin, F1 himself of the Washington Commanders, underdog ADP wide receiver 26 at pick 49.2. Interesting tidbit of information that I heard a little bit ago. It appears that the Commanders didn't get the trademark for the Commanders, so they might end up having to change their name again, which would just be very funny, right? The football team, the Commanders, what are they going to be next? We shall see. Wide receiver 14 last year in half PPR. Wide receiver 22 in half PPR points per game, tied with Mike Williams, Magic Mike Williams. 17 games played in 2022. 120 targets, 7.1 per game, 19th, 77 receptions, 4.5 per game, 21st, 1,191 receiving yards, 70.1 per game, 9th, and 5 total touchdowns, 29th. Terry McLaurin is a wide receiver that has been plagued by awful quarterback play. You can list off all of the names. It is a laundry list of names. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that picture, but it's the Browns jersey where the guy just crosses off the name and just keeps writing the quarterback that is the starter there. And it's like a million names long of just garbage quarterbacks. That's basically what Terry McLaurin has had to deal with ever since he came into the NFL. And even despite the quarterback play being subpar, Terry McLaurin is still able to play quite well. Now, his ceiling has yet to be reached, because I genuinely believe under good quarterback play, Terry McLaurin could be a top 5 wide receiver in fantasy football. Now, if you compare the quarterback room from this season to last season, it is kind of comparable, right? It's definitely not worse than last season, maybe slightly better, right? If you believe in Sam Howell, and even if Sam Howell doesn't succeed and they move to Jacoby Brissett, things are just fine for Terry McLaurin, who is the clear number 1 wide receiver in his offense. Again, another guy like Devante Adams, where even though the quarterback play might be pretty fucking hit or miss, the guy still is able to overcome that. 7.1 target accuracy, 61st at wide receiver. Again, Adams ranked 69th. Very nice, I like. My name is Borat. 9.9 yards per target, 7th, and 15.5 yards per reception, 11th. So again, despite the piss-poor quarterback play, Terry McLaurin was still able to elevate himself past that. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Nick, you have talked very positively about Jahan Dotson. Does that mean that Terry McLaurin can't succeed if Dotson succeeds? The answer is no. I like both of them based upon where they are going. It's not like you have to draft Terry McLaurin at pick 49 and then at pick 57, draft Jahan Dotson. They are in completely different points in the draft. And especially in regular redraft leagues, it seems like, based upon all the mocks I've done, no one has really caught on to the Jahan Dotson bandwagon just yet. So McLaurin, even with mid-quarterback play, was a top 24 wide receiver in half PPR points per game and was wide receiver 14 in half PPR last season. Sam Howell looked good in his one game he got to play last year. I'm not saying that Sam Howell's the second coming of Patrick Mahomes, which I have read on Twitter, because people on Twitter are smoking that loud all the time. They don't know what they're talking about, but he doesn't need to be that. He just needs to throw the ball somewhere near Terry McLaurin, and we'll be just fine. So, again, I think people are really sleeping on the name of a really talented NFL wide receiver in Terry McLaurin. Moving to number 3, we got Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Current underdog ADP wide receiver 29 at pick 58.5. Last year, he was the wide receiver 20 in half PPR and the wide receiver 20 in half PPR points per game, tied with Jerry Jeudy. Now, obviously, there is a big difference in quarterback play going from Tampa Bay Tom Brady to Baker Mayfield or Kyle Trask, and I get that. We didn't even see that good of a version of Tom Brady, and the Buccaneers offense struggled a bit. But still, even with an offense that struggles, in 15 games, Chris Godwin had 142 targets, 9.5 per game, 10th. 104 receptions, 6.9 per game, 6th. 1,023 receiving yards, 68.2 per game, 20th. And 3 total touchdowns, 50th at wide receiver. Again, last year for the Bucs was a humongous step down from the prior 2 years of the Tom Brady regime. But still, Godwin had over 1,000 receiving yards. And now he is going to start the season fully healthy, because if you remember, Chris Godwin came into the season following an injury in 2021. So now we got a fully healthy Chris Godwin. The only negative here is the quarterback play. If you've kind of noticed a bit of a trend here, we've got quarterbacks that don't look the best with receivers that are great. And they're so good that I think they could still be effective. 5.13 target quality rating last year with fucking Tom Brady, 71st. But a 45.8% route win rate, 20th, 258 total route wins, 5th. Now, again, I don't expect this Tampa Bay offense to bounce back and go back to the former glory that they had under Tom Brady with Baker or Kyle Trask. I don't think so. I think Baker's going to be the starter. I think Baker's going to give us some good games, and he's going to give us some really bad games where he throws some bad picks. There's going to be a team that is going to be down in games and having to throw late, which even further solidifies my love for Chris Godwin in fantasy football this season. Again, I get the worries. I get Baker Mayfield. I get Kyle Trask. I'd be shocked if it was Kyle Trask. Let's be honest. Kyle Trask has been in the league for 3 years and hasn't done shit. Baker Mayfield was the #1 overall pick to the Cleveland Browns all those years ago. Now, I know Baker has shown some highs. He's shown some incredibly low lows. He had that game where he showed up to the Rams 7 seconds before the game and led them to a victory, I believe, against the Raiders. I think at least that's who they're playing, and it was a great game. It was so cool to see for Baker Mayfield as someone who's a Baker Mayfield fan. But I don't let the blinders of my fandom of Baker Mayfield blind me from the fact that the guy isn't the best. But again, you don't need the best for Chris Godwin to be great. Because again, Tom Brady wasn't even the best, and Godwin was still able to eat. And you also have the added bonus that I think there's a chance that one of Mike Evans or Chris Godwin gets shipped off to another team. Now, which team will that be? Who knows? Who knows? My guess is as good as yours. But that could even be further. You get him now at wide receiver 29. He goes to X team and he moves up to wide receiver 20, 18, right? Because he's that good of a player. He is just being sunk like the fucking Titanic in his ADP because of the quarterback situation. Before we move on into the final wide receiver that I can't stop drafting in today's video, I would like to give you guys a quick word from our friends, and our sponsor over at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy is the best place to play best ball fantasy football this summer. If you don't know what best ball is, it is the best part about fantasy football. It's the draft. There's no waivers, no trades, and no in-season management because Underdog automatically puts in the highest scores into your lineup at the end of every single week. If you are brand new to Underdog Fantasy and want to check it out, please click on the link in the video description or use promo code Notorious for a 100% deposit bonus of up to $100. So if you deposit $100, they give you an additional $100. If you deposit $50, you get an additional $50. $25, you get an additional $25. They just opened the Poodle 2 tournament. $7 to enter, 20 max entries. 60,000 to first place, or you can play in the Behemoth, the Best Ball Mania for $25 to enter, $3 million to first place. Make sure you guys check it out. Link in the video description. Back on into things, we move to the final wide receiver of today's video, Nico Collins of the Houston Texans, current Underdog ADP wide receiver 62 at pick 139.9. Now, Nico Collins, in terms of statistics since he's been in the NFL, has not been great. Right? Wide receiver, 78.5 PPR last season, 53 in points per game, 10 games played with 7 starts in 2023, 66 targets, 6.6 per game, 63rd, 37 receptions, 3.7 per game, 72nd, 481 receiving yards, 48.1 per game, 68th, and 2 total touchdowns, 76th. Now, do I expect greatness out of Nico Collins with Davis Money Mills and let's call a spade, a garbage offense, right? The Houston Texans offense, ever since Nico Collins has been there, has been nothing short of a fucking disaster, right? They were terrible, game in and game out, but still, we saw some flashes out of Nico Collins. Again, if you just look at the stat sheet, it's not going to tell you the whole story of how good Nico Collins actually is. Despite having a 6.2 target accuracy, 100th at wide receiver, this man had a 66.7% catch rate, second at wide receiver, and a 112.1% true catch rate, fourth at wide receiver. This is a player that, despite the quarterback play being bad, was still able to go out there and play well. he's surrounded by guys like John Mechie, who I think could have a pretty solid sophomore season. Didn't play at all last year due to health complications. They draft Tank Adell. They also bring in another wide receiver of Robert Woods, who is just a corpse of himself. So Nico Collins, out of that grouping, you would probably say is at least the number 2 guy and probably the number 1 guy. They draft CJ Stroud, who, again, I'm not necessarily saying he's the best quarterback in this class. I think Bryce Young is, but, it's not like Bryce Young is miles and miles and miles ahead of Bryce Young, in my opinion. So I think that they're in a very good spot with CJ Stroud. They bring in a new head coach of the 49ers, who I think could be very useful for their defense. Not necessarily the most offensive-minded head coach, but anything's better than what Nico Collins has had over the last couple of years. Obviously, Lovie Smith is kind of a punching bag in the NFL, if I'm being honest with you. So again, we got a guy that might be the wide receiver number 1 on his team, on a team that just drafted a quarterback that's going to want to throw the ball a decent amount. Again, I think the defense might be sneaky good, which might hurt Nico Collins, but ultimately, he could be the wide receiver 1 on his team, and he's coming off the board at wide receiver 62. You don't need him to be wide receiver number 10 for him to pay off at his average draft position. So, just think about it. I know the Texans, when you say that name over the last couple of years, ever since Watson, it's gross. Disgusting, right? The Houston Texans have been a shell of what seemed like a team that was going to be AFC competitors for years to come. And then obviously Deshaun Watson happened and not so much, but you know what I mean? So Nico Collins, again, I think he's a pretty skilled player. I think he's going to be put into a good role to succeed. And again, this is a deep shot from fucking 3, from Stephen Curry range, right? You're shooting from half court with your eyes closed, doing a 360 at pick 140 in redraft leagues. That's right before you take your kicker in your defense. So I'm going to take a shot, again, on the guy that I think might be the wide receiver 1 on his team. This is something I've done in the past. I've done it with Jacoby Myers. He's the number 1 receiver on the Patriots in the past. So why not just draft him late? Makes perfect sense. You can just land the number 1 option on a team. And even if the team isn't the best, that's still valuable in fantasy football because there's going to potentially be a lot of targets and way better targets coming from CJ Stroud. So thank you guys all so much for watching. Again, if you did end up enjoying, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below as well as hitting that like button. It would help me out a ton. If you want to follow me on Twitter, please do so at notoriousFNTSY. I love you guys all so much. Again, make sure you check out Underdog Fantasy if you haven't already. It helps me out if you check them out. It's going to help you because, again, you get that $100 first match deposit bonus. I love you guys all so much. Have a great guys' day. And as always, good boy.